Hello, everyone. We were having such a good conversation that we forgot to press the go live button. I am here with Michael Stone from the Public Education Foundation. He is the Vice President of Innovative Learning. But the really exciting thing that he does, in my opinion, is that he leads the largest school-based Fab Lab network. And for those of you who maybe are new to Fab Labs, I mean, there when you just make something really fabulous or fabricate something really fabulous. Yeah, so we're going to dive deep into that element of it. So welcome, Michael, and tell us about what you do.
Well, thank you, Tara. Thank you for having me. Yeah, like you said, I'm blessed to get to work with the Public Ed Foundation. We're a local nonprofit in Southeast Tennessee, in the United States. And for more than 30 years now, the organization has had the opportunity to partner with Hamilton County Schools, a large school district in our region, with a simple mission to try to transform public education in our community so that every student has an opportunity to thrive.
And tell us more about what this area in Tennessee looks like. What is it? What are the demographics of the students? What is it like to be maybe a student in a rural area or in an urban area?
Sure. So our school system is a little bit unique in that we're a mid-sized school system, about 45,000 students, give or take, in the local system. But they fall. It's a county school system, so they fall in. It's any students that live in the Hamilton County area in Southeast Tennessee. Geographically, it's bigger than the state of Rhode Island, so it's a very large amount of land. With a metropolitan center in Chattanooga, where we have an urban core and sort of the trappings that come with serving students in an urban environment. We have suburban neighborhoods and some affluent communities on the periphery, and then we also have some rural communities in the school district. So it really provides a unique opportunity where your hand is almost forced to approach public education through a lens of equity, because you're truly serving a very diverse range of students, both in terms of ethnicities. We have some schools that serve students that speak more than 27 languages. We have schools with high concentrations of students growing up in poverty, and a number of schools that are high concentrations of BIPOC community students.
I mean, that's why teaching is such a hard job, right? Trying to understand where your students are, what they face at home. So tell us how you came up with the idea of starting the Fab Lab network. How did it, and how have you grown it? I mean, that to me is such an incredible feat in itself, that inspiring people to say, okay, this is what we're going to try to do, because it requires quite a bit of technical capacity building.
Sure. So I guess like all good ideas, it happened organically as a solution to a real challenge that we were facing in our community. 2012, we have a STEM school here in Chattanooga that was started as part of the Race to the Top initiative under the President Obama administration. It was started as a platform school with the charge to innovate and really push the boundaries of what was possible in education. They were a project-based learning focused school that served an intentionally diverse swath of students from across this huge region. So students were provided free busing. They're given, at the time, an iPad. They've since switched to Chromebooks. But they really were trying to reimagine what was possible in high school. So it was a 9-12 school. They were building it 1 year at a time. And by 2014, they were starting their first junior class. And they realized their students were having these incredible learning experiences. And they were able to dive into some very rich work in the project-based learning sort of schema. But those projects were always ending with like cardboard and duct tape models and PowerPoint presentations. Right? The kids were doing great presentations. They had community partners and they were presenting to businesses. And it sort of had the foundational elements that you go, they're really onto something. You could really feel a positive momentum. But the principal, Dr. Tony Donan, he was previously trained, his undergraduate degree was in systems engineering from Virginia Tech, and he knew students weren't getting an opportunity to iterate and design. So he went out with his team doing some research. They found the Fab Foundation, which came out of MIT, discovered the Fab Lab model, looked to see what schools were doing with that, found some partnership across the country, and they launched the Fab Lab. I was blessed at the time as a teacher to go open that lab and run that lab with their students with a kind of a unique spin. It does, Fab Labs have large format CNC routers and mills and laser cutters and 3D printers. And microbits and Raspberry Pis and sort of all this amazing technology. And that was definitely present in the lab. But the school, the design they took was to say, we don't want to make the lab about learning technology. We want to make the lab about empowering students to solve problems when they have access to technology. So it was a subtle but profound difference in some of what we had seen in labs in other communities around the country. That work was transformative in that school. 2 years later, 2017, Volkswagen Group of America noticed what was going on. They saw the power and impact of what this was doing to train students. Volkswagen has a factory here in Chattanooga. Their only North American plant is here in our community. They made a $1 million investment through the Public Ed Foundation to open 16 more labs. That investment catalyzed, it was sort of a seed investment. It grew to about $3.5 million with other partners jumping on board and the district contributing. And we were able to open 16 labs in schools, middle schools and high schools over the next couple of years. And then this year, we've been continuing to grow that. So we're now to 30 labs. We will be at 40 labs by 2023. And we've since expanded. In fact, just this August, we opened our first 7 labs in elementary schools. And they're all carrying that same focus. Yeah.
That's amazing, Michael. And I think this is one of the examples of a story where continued investment into something, right, like really results. And I'm thrilled to hear, right, like this is an example from the Race to the Top school. I remember in the Obama administration, like we were one of the beneficiaries of a really large Office of Naval Research grant that helped us scale up. But I'm always wary when like the work has been done and then it cannot be continued forward, right? So this is a fabulous story. So have you been involved in this since the very beginning?
I have. So I wasn't involved with the STEM school. My office that I currently serve in was. In fact, we were founded with Race to the Top with the mission of, my office specifically was founded with the mission to work alongside STEM school as they leverage some of the flexibility and autonomy to really push the boundaries of what was possible. The nonprofit, the Public Ed Foundation, started an office simultaneously that would work with the admin team. We continue to this day from that school to identify like what's working and to drill down beyond the window dressing or the mechanics of what's working and really understand why it's working so that we could scale that across the district. That's happened in a number of ways, but the Fab Labs are a great example.
And so diving into, tell us what a student does in a Fab Lab. And I mean, I'm a little bit of a skeptic, to be completely honest, because when I've sort of watched the 3D printing movement, and we have a 3D printer in the library, and I've always wondered what is the problem solving element there, and so I'm willing to be convinced.
Sure. So it's really for us in our community, what we've done is we've been really intentional to make sure that for students from K through 12, that the focus isn't about the technology. They need to learn about the technology so they can use it. But the goal is not to increase mastery in three-dimensional design or mechanical functionality or digital physical computing. They certainly acquire those skills, but we consider that development of those technical skills to be incidental. They happen to develop them, but that's not the end game, right? That's a means to an end. So that's what we don't do. The question is, what do we do to make sure that that's a meaningful part of the experience? We've worked with Dr. Gary Stager and Sylvia Martinez. They authored the book Invent to Learn a couple years ago, a newer version of it out. Gary has a great line. He says, in his mind, and this has become the foundation for everything we do, we want to create environments where we want to empower and equip teachers to create environments where students experience such deep learning that where they experience deep learning as a consequence of rich experience. So they get to have these meaningful experiences in the lab. They get to have ideas come to life. But the way we go about that to make sure, to your point, that it's not, I've seen a lot of kids 3D print Yoda, right? That somebody else designed, and pushing print is not particularly creative or critical thinking or problem. It's not a skill, right? So to get past that, what we do is we work with teachers to design project-based learning units where the rubric for those units becomes a foundational element. And that rubric doesn't just grade content. So content could be software for a 3D printer. It could be math standards for the state. We know content is important. We're not trying to say it shouldn't be important, but process has to be equally valued, right? Or STEM essential skills. So we could call that down to talk like the 4 C's, communication, creativity, collaboration, and critical thinking. Everyone agrees, most educators agree those elements are really important, but we don't explicitly teach them. And so we're using the labs as a mechanism to open a door where we can now teach and assess those skills. And students just happen to be using amazing technology, so their products aren't duct tape and cardboard, right?
I think that's what Technovation believes in. Is like, I love that phrase, deep learning as a result of rich experiences, where, well, the technology is just a means to an end, right? And yes, I'm convinced. So how did you convince teachers to adopt? I mean, none of this comes easily, right? Like, these are big, heavy loads, in addition to all the other challenges teachers face. So what is your method of converting a teacher?
So a teacher isn't hard. All teachers is really hard.
Yeah.
So we take sort of, we like to use like pioneer language around this. We look for schools where we have principals and a handful, maybe just 2 or 3 teachers who are ready to go be trailblazers. And not every school is there, but we look for, and also it's not really, there doesn't seem to be a clear correlation between those trailblazers and like great test scores. So it can be a school that doesn't necessarily have high achievement scores, but they've got some champions who are ready to go blaze a trail. And like, we think about them as like, they don't want a trail cut for
them. That's very true to life too, right? Yes. Like, I mean, your Ivy League graduate is not necessarily the best performer on your team.
Exactly. So once you find them, that's what we've done. Is we look for them and we start small. So instead of starting with all 80 schools in the region at one time, we started with 8. We said, okay, we've got a North Star. We have a model that we know works that we can point at and say, we can't copy the model, but we can use it as sort of foundational elements for a replicable model.
And it's put into the school day curriculum?
It is. So it's baked into the student experience during the day. And those champion teacher, 1 or 2 teachers and the principal really provide the foundation so that we can get it launched. We ask them to find, we call it an innovation team. So the teacher that's going to run the lab during the day, like teach in the lab, is expected to work with the principal to find 3 or 4 teachers who will still be in a regular classroom, who will go through the same training. So they get some idea of what's possible. But their responsibility may be to teach math or English or history. But they now have a sense of like, they start rethinking, like, can I teach history? Okay, what would it look like to teach American history when I happen to have access to a Fab Lab? And I've got a teacher in the lab who can help. I don't have to know all the technical stuff, but a teacher in the lab who can help support students.
Where does the funding come from for that teacher in the lab?
So the school district staffs the labs just with regular faculty. And what's interesting is we've found our best success is not recruiting technical experts to run the labs, but recruiting amazing teachers. And then we work with them over a 3-year period to shore up their technical
Curious
skills.
Teachers.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm curious, a couple of things, and maybe this is not an easy question. Do you have any data to show that can be used to convince people that this is the value of Fab Lab brings to your school students?
Sure. So we're still pretty early in the scaling process. So we don't have a lot of hard data from a quantitative standpoint. We've actually just started working with some researchers to really drill in and pull out sort of those elements. What we do have, though, is, from a research standpoint, it's not publishable yet, but sort of anecdotal evidence. We are seeing from, I'll give an example, one of our first labs was opened in a middle school that was in danger of state takeover. It was a failing school, bottom 5% in the state. Sort of as a Hail Mary, they had a new principal who wanted to be there, which was a huge step in the first case, and a teacher who was thought this could be a way we could change our students' lives and really rethink this work. That school over the next 3 years saw a significant, in fact, more than double. The school serves 100% students of color, 98% students in poverty, coming from poverty, and what they saw over the first 3 years they had their lab, they saw more than double their numbers, so more than 100% increase in students who applied to go to the STEM school, and in students who at the high school level particularly female students, they saw a little more than 100% of the students start selecting STEM pathways for their CTE work, for their for their elective pathways. So simple example, but it's an interesting one.
It's a very powerful one. So what are some examples of projects that teacher did in that particular school, if you remember?
Sure. So one that jumps out at me, I'll never forget. He did it in sixth grade. Teacher's name was Chris Signard. With his sixth graders, so his students had never had any experience coding or 3D printing. I mean, as you would expect, this was all brand new technology to most students. Certainly was at the school. There's a young lady in that group. He ran a project where he asked the students. This would not be a PBL, but more of we call it a design challenge. It was sort of separated from content standards, but still interesting in terms of process. He challenged the students to create a space that was unique to them, a model of a space that was unique and meaningful to each team, and left it there. So they could create any space that was unique and interesting to them, and they had to be able to present why was this interesting, what was valuable about, meaningful about what they designed. This group it was 4 girls in middle school, again, low performing school historically in terms of state test data and whatnot. These 4 young ladies got together and they had a little club that they ran between them. It's sort of a friend group. They designed a treehouse in Tinkercad that they 3D printed. But what was unique about it was they actually put the treehouse inside the trunk of the tree. So the tree was made in 2 parts, and they, in a 4-week span, learned just enough about Arduino to control a couple little servo motors with a motion sensor. When they waved at it, the treehouse would spin open.
That's so cool.
It was awesome, right? Like,
that's
we don't
so
really
cool.
care about the product, but they did, and that's what's powerful. Right? It was an idea in their head. They were empowered to bring it to life. Today, the lead student on that team is a student at the STEM school. She's a sophomore at the STEM school. She's their top coder at the STEM school, which is a very academically high performing school. So it's just a really interesting
That's awesome.
example.
Yeah. That's a great story. Yeah, right. Like these tools unlock imagination, curiosity, and that's what it is, right? Like it's a spark, but with the right teacher. So, how did COVID affect all of this? Because I mean, you are a lab; it's all physical. How can it go online? And tell us about that.
So our district worked. The first answer is like COVID definitely affected things. Like everywhere else, it impacted everything. If nothing else, it brought like a cloud of ambiguity over everything that we did, because to your point, there was so much uncertainty. I have to give kudos to our local school district. That Hamilton County Schools officials developed a task force very quickly. They were applauded across the state for their responsiveness, and the thoughtfulness of their response to the pandemic just as it hit our community. We were able to keep students in school for the majority of the school year. More than 90% of student days last year, students were actually on campus. So that helped. And we had a couple of teachers who, I mean, this work, right? If it's not about learning technology, it's about problem solving. The teachers have to model that. And so the teachers in these labs in many of the schools really demonstrated resourcefulness along with resiliency, the same attributes we want our students to demonstrate. The teachers modeled, and I think we saw that evidence itself in a number of ways as they responded to COVID.
And what are some examples? Like how did the Fab Lab network respond to COVID?
Sure. So I mean, the one that grabbed headlines and people got some kudos for is probably the most prominent. So it's the easy go-to. In fact, I think I have it here. I see it in my own background. So Joseph Prusa and the Prusa 3D printers, they designed this headband and put it out, from Czechoslovakia. And there's a global network that was starting to work on how they designed this. We aggregated all of our 3D printers from the lab. So we put together a 3D print farm in a matter of 3 days. Our local hospital system reached out. This was spring of 2020. So there was a major PPE shortage everywhere. We had 2 teams. One team that was working, it was a team of teachers and students working with an engineering group from our community, working to find creative alternatives to N95 masks. If you remember, a year and a half ago, there was a major mask shortage. What we discovered from the hospital was that, yes, they needed masks, but they also needed face shields. And they could not find them. They could not find a supplier to make them. So we brought together more than 100 3D printers. The students at this time were not allowed on campus because of COVID. So the teachers had the availability. They worked it around their planning schedules. So they were still teaching
Wow.
virtually. They came together. We had 37 teachers volunteer to run the farm for 3 weeks. And over 3 weeks' time, we 3D printed. We had to modify the model a little bit to work for the hospital specifications, but we 3D printed and assembled, laser cut some elements, 3D printed the bands and assembled 7,199 face shields that we were able to donate to the local hospitals, which was just
That's
really
incredible.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and also incredible volunteering on the teacher's part. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So where does the plastic come from? The clear plastic, like, is that in the 3D printed part is the band?
Yeah, so the 3D printed part is the actual headband. The black stuff here
Uh-huh.
is all 3D printed. We kept modifying it to speed up the process because 3D printing can be slow on an FDM style sort of hobby level printer. So we had to modify that a little bit from the original
7,000 is
design.
insane.
It was a bunch. This is actually the plastic sheeting we laser cut
Right.
initially. So we put in laser cutters and we're cutting that. We can cut that in pretty large bulk. And the local media picked up the story, and we actually had a local car detailing shop that does like window tinting and like paint jobs on cars. That they had a supplier that could get the plastic in bulk, and they had a machine that could cut it all in one run. So they were able to cut a little over 8,000 of the pieces of plastic for us in one day.
That's amazing. I mean, that's a great story of how the community comes together, right?
Yeah.
In the face of a challenge like this. Um, how does that make you feel?
Oh, I mean, it's great. Locally, Chattanooga is our big city. They talk about the community coming together here as the Chattanooga way. That it's
Mm,
really, we have a history of this the spirit of camaraderie and collective, like the community is only as good as the community is community,
mm,
right? So like we have to come together for the greater good. And I mean, just to get to be a part of it,
mm.
much less work alongside a couple of other leaders to sort of spearhead the effort. It was phenomenal to know that we all watched, well, we have watched for a year and a half now what people on the front lines in the medical field and our first responders have had to deal with COVID. And so many times, I would look at my wife and just, you feel helpless. You want to contribute,
Mm,
but you don't know what
mm.
to do besides, if you can contribute financially, but like you feel like there's a human element, you need more. So getting to be a part of an effort where you could work with teachers who, dedicated their lives to making a difference for kids are suddenly able to be like, wait, we can use those same skills and make a difference for first
And the same
responders.
tools.
It's
Yeah.
powerful. Yeah.
And I love the story of like thoughtful investment over time. Um, that's what's needed to build a foundation for you to be able to act quickly, right? And to respond to a crisis. And I think that's the key to a resilient community where you have the skills, the technical capacity for in people, right? Um, so what does like success look like for you and for the students and for the community in, say, over the next year as we still navigate COVID, but then maybe over the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think as we continue to navigate COVID, we're still dealing with. I mean, there's variants and the challenges of uncertainty that the pandemic just seems to keep sort of pouring across the globe. Um, it's hard to put our finger on exactly what success looks like a year from now. I mean, to some degree, we're still sort of in survival mode.
Yep. Yep.
So I think there's an element of just like, can we just keep persisting, right? Sometimes you don't have to run. It's a 20-mile march. One more step forward is an important step. I think we may be still in that spirit right now, but over the next 5 years, what I'm hopeful of, and I think optimistic about, is that the lessons learned through the pandemic aren't just about health
Yeah.
and safety, right? I think we're realizing the power. It's cliche, but it really is amazing what people can do, what organizations can do when they work together and no one cares who gets credit. And in a pandemic, people stop caring about credit and they
Mm,
start caring much more about results, right? Can we just keep moving the needle forward? And while it's shown the pandemic has shined a bright spotlight on specific challenges that maybe flew under the radar for some of our members of our
mm,
most underserved communities, it's a bright spotlight, and we're now
mm,
seeing that. So we're much more responsive. We had a couple of community agencies that worked diligently to provide free high-speed internet connection for
mm.
all underserved, all lower income families in our community. Like that's that should be a basic need that
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
hadn't talked about previously, and suddenly that's at the forefront of our conversation. I think in 5 years we see a lot more of that,
Mm.
and hopefully we don't just turn a blind eye, as a country, as a people, to folks who really need additional support.
Yeah, and I think access to the basic tools is number one and can be dealt with, can be done. It's a tangible problem. And I think the other piece is access to social capital, right? And I think I like the fact like we are more open to virtual connections now than we were before. So you already shared one awesome story, but I'm hungry for more stories. What is another story that inspired you? I mean, you have had so many amazing stories, but do you have one more for us?
Oh, specific to COVID?
No, anything that fuels you.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so I'll share one that's a little bit older, but it was for me very personal. I think pretty powerful. We had a young lady when I was teaching in the first Fab Lab in our community back in 2014. She was a 16-year-old student, a junior at the time. She made good grades, but kind of maybe for the wrong reasons. She was a good student because she had learned to be compliant and like had good handwriting, but stayed quiet, stayed in the back of the class, and didn't. I'm not sure she was like tapping into her full potential. Um, she was a part of a PBL, the first PBL we did in the lab. We had 6 partners they could pick, and one of the partners was our local power provider whose headquarters are in the middle of our downtown. They've got big windows, and they do like this Macy's like Thanksgiving Day style like holiday display in their windows with animatronics, and they dress it up real fancy and red curtain every year. It's a big tradition in the community. They had invited our students to make like science fair size like tabletop models to inform their designers and engineers of like what might you do in this space this year. So they didn't have a theme for the year, so our kids could think wildly. This is just after Frozen had come out. So this young lady with her team, she'd been very quiet, didn't identify as a student who like hung out in the Fab Lab, loved to code things. Or it just wasn't how she identified. It wasn't part of her makeup at the time. We come to at the end of the first 9 weeks, she goes to present with her team. They happen to be the last group presenting, and they've made this sort of rudimentary model of an Elsa's ice castle out of acrylic. They basically just laser cut it and engraved a little bit. It was cute, and she's making a pretty polished presentation. And the executive director from the organization interrupts her and says, "I'm sorry to interrupt you, young lady, but this is beautiful." She said, "Can you make this for real?" And without skipping a beat, the young student said, "Oh, absolutely," which scared me to death because I knew as the teacher I'd be responsible to like, now we have to actually make this for real. I was brand new to this work, did not have training in it, and we were sort of, building the ship while it was sailing. um, Over the next 5 weeks, this student, her name was Leah, she and her 2 teammates learned just enough of AutoCAD to be able to operate our full CNC router. The company donated the acrylic, all the sheet goods, and she designed and built a 10-foot tall by 12-foot deep by 30-foot long acrylic ice castle that was just extraordinary. It was beautiful. The media covered the sort of curtain display when they pulled up the curtains and did this whole to do. She was excited, but the best part was what happened after that. She realized two things in that project. She discovered an interest. She realized she actually likes doing that kind of stuff. It was a way to blend art and mechanics that she had never considered before. So she realized an interest she had that she didn't know she had, and she realized an aptitude. She was pretty darn good at this. So she graduated this last spring with a degree in mechanical engineering from Tennessee Tech University. She had never considered that as a possible career path until she had the opportunity to use real tools to solve real problems. And in doing so, develop this identity where I can take things in my head and make them real. And if I can do that, I can have some ownership over my learning experience. It had a profound impact on her life. It changed my life as well.
I mean, that is such an amazing story. It gave me goosebumps. And now I want to go out and get my own 3D printer. And you've convinced me, Michael. Tell us, what is a good printer to buy? And I mean, maybe there's a range. There's no good answer to that one.
Yeah, so not sponsored here at all.
Yeah.
You'll see there's a Dremel 3D printer over my shoulder. It's a nice printer made by Bosch and Dremel out of the Chicago area. We really like
How much is
those.
it?
That's about $1,200, $1,300. They kind
Okay.
of range. Yeah, down from there, and a printer we use in a lot of our labs is made by Prusa. It's
Mm-hmm.
Prusa. It
Mm-hmm.
sells. You can buy the kits for about $750, where you assemble it, or you can buy them assembled for about $1,000, give or take. And then there's a kind of a newer model from a company called Creality. They make a range of printers as well. They start in the low 200s and sort of build up from there. But they're getting a lot of buzz in the 3D printing community. I want to be clear, I'm not a 3D printing expert, but we bought several of them and used them a lot. So
Yep.
at the hobby level, that's probably
I think
three
that's
nice brands.
that's the first level to start at, right? We are almost at the end, and I mean, there's so much more to cover here, Michael. Tell us, what is a favorite book of yours that we should read?
Oh, okay. Here's what I'm reading right now. It's hot on my mind. Think Again by Adam Grant. Really love it. I think coming out of the pandemic, hopefully coming out of the pandemic, it's a
Yep, yep,
great book to push our thinking.
yep. Thank you. And last question, what should we be working on with intention this year?
Ooh. Um, I think for me, it's if nothing else, the silver lining with the pandemic is I think it has forced us to reconsider how we design what we do and why we
Mm,
do it, to rethink those things. So for me, it's all about human-centered design. And that's in my domain, that's in K-12 education. Are we actually designing with students' needs and interests in mind, or are we designing for some arbitrary metric design, created by adults farther down the pipeline? But I think we've really got to be more thoughtful about how we consider the human experience in everything that we do.
yeah. Thank you, Michael. This was such a fun conversation. Thank you for sharing your extensive experience engaging students in building beautiful, meaningful things that change their lives and the lives of those who touch. So, thank you. And I want to go out and get my own 3D printer or use the one at the library.
It was wonderful to connect. Thank you for having me.
All right. Take care.